Welcome to this week's class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse in the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Rabim. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse on Shabbos Parshas Noach. That year was the fourth day of the month of Marchshon, in the year Tafshin Chavhei, 60 years ago. So again, this Chassidic discourse is based on the verse in the prophets where it says Rabim, an abundance of water. Lo Yuchlu, Lekhabot Haahava, cannot extinguish the love that we have. Obviously, the spiritual idea of the water, since this week speaks about the Noach, the flood, so we're talking about the spiritual water. So Rebbe says, and he explains as follows, that when someone is worried and concerned about his livelihood, that is called Rabim, just like water is rushing, so you're worried, you're concerned about making a living, etc. So even though someone has all these concerns and worries, they cannot extinguish, and it cannot wash away, and it cannot get us defocused from the love that the Jewish people have for Hashem, and Hashem have for the Jewish people. The Rebbe says that the point that's brought out in the Chassidic discourse of the Alter Rebbe in Torah, which is called the Chassidic Torah portion, what is he bringing out with this idea? That love, what is love referring to? What does it mean you love Hashem? So the practicality is when a person sits and prays and you do what's called avodas hatfilah, you're working in prayer, and that's the real love. That's where the love for Hashem gets expressed. And like the Zohar says, "Les pulchano kipulchano derech." There's no prayer, there's no connection like love for Hashem, which happens through prayer. And like the Rebbe says, it's explained in the powerful Chassidic book called Kuntras Avodah, the Kuntras of serving Hashem, the difference between loving Hashem and being in awe of Hashem. And he explains that love, that's constant. A person's always in awe of Hashem. However, the idea of love, when this love gets on fire, when it gets activated, when it gets that worked on, that happens in prayer. And it happens by learning Chassidus, Kabbalah, mysticism, and like it's explained many places, and especially in the teaching of the Rebbe Rashab in his book called Kuntras Eitz Chaim. Now, so that is what the idea, the love. What is the Rabim? What is the abundance of water? That's called the worries and the concerns about earning a livelihood. But nevertheless, that will not extinguish the love for Hashem. Like we explained, the love is our relationship with Hashem through prayer. But on the contrary, when we go ahead, and yes, even though we have worries and concerns and trying to pay the bills and try to, to support families, charities, etc., but when your person does not get distracted and it doesn't affect your love, and on the contrary, you withstand the test. So what happens is a concept in Kabbalah called Yisrael Orim Mitoch Choshech. From the darkness, from the struggle, when you overcome the struggle, you have a much greater light. Because we come to the level, like it says in Shema, we come to the level, we were able to serve Hashem from a much deeper place. And like, for example, the Rebbe gives an example, like if you have water that's flowing, and then all of a sudden you block the water. So what happens when you block the water? So not only doesn't it block it, but it actually creates a heavy force afterwards, because the water is going to overflow the blockage. So the same thing also when the animal soul tries to block and conceal the godly soul, we become much stronger and we come to the level of a relation with Hashem, which is called machal ma'oidcha, with all our might. So therefore he explains over there the importance, and since this happens when during prayer, so he explains the importance of prayer and especially for those that are in business, and to God forbid not to go ahead and make the mistake that want to say no, that's not so. Why? Because the fact is they have much more Rabim, they have much more water, they have much more challenges. On the contrary, they because they have so much more, therefore they have to focus more on the love for Hashem. But the Rebbe says, but in reference to those that sit and learn Torah, and those like Yoshev Oil, so that for sure you don't have to encourage them. We don't have to remind them they have to pray. Why? Because it's self-understood, and there's no thinking that like someone that's in business saying maybe I shouldn't pray because again I'm not thinking that. You shouldn't think that. On the contrary, someone that's so busy learning and someone that does mitzvahs and someone that's in holy work, for sure you have to pray more quantitatively and more qualitatively. And you don't need, for example, a command and an instruction from a Rebbe or a leader in the generation to inspire you and guide you to pray, or even to hint you have to pray. And even if the person is not praying at length, and you can think, maybe they know about it. I'm not praying at length, and no one told me anything. So obviously I'm good. But the fact is, that's why it says in Torah that for someone that's learning Torah, you don't have to encourage or inspire them, because it's a simple thing that prayer is very, very important to activate and to motivate and to keep the love for Hashem very, 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 very strongly. And it's like the Rebbe says, it's also explained in the Alter Rebbe's Tanya, in the section of Geras HaKodesh, the Holy Letters, and he says over there as follows: when it comes to Shabbos and Yom Tov, who should go ahead and be the chazan? Who should lead the prayer services? A business person. However, during the week, you can't really ask them to pray during the week, because they're busy, they're distracted, they have to go to work, and therefore they can't go ahead and lead the service. And especially when they're supposed to be, the idea of a chazan is he's supposed to be elevating everyone's prayers. And there are people that have the time to pray longer. And therefore, it doesn't make sense that the one leading the service is going to try to do it quick, and those that have time are going to try to pray longer. So therefore, who should pray, the Alter Rebbe says? Those that are basically sitting and their parents are supporting them. And they have the time to meditate, and they have the time to prolong in prayer. But the fact is, when it comes to prayer on Shabbos, so that will depend on how they pray during the week. Like to explain in Chassidut that prayer is like a blessing before you eat. And just like we say, in order to eat, who eats? Someone that prepares the food. And more time you spend preparing the food, that's the type of food you're going to have. So the same thing also when it comes to the prayer on Shabbat, those that prepared in the prayer during the week, they're going to have obviously a whole different prayer on Shabbat. By going ahead during the week, and even though, yes, quantitatively you don't have the time for a prolonged prayer, but you can spend time, a few minutes meditating on prayer, then you'll merit that on Shabbat you're going to have to qualitatively and quantitatively pray more. So what the Rebbe is saying is, again, when it comes to during the week, yes, a businessman doesn't have the time to pray as much, but he does have the little time he has to focus more intently. And when you focus more intently, then comes on Shabbos, you have to pray longer and with more intensity. And the Rebbe says this applies to every single person. And if a person is going to want to, so to speak, argue with the Alter Rebbe, and you're going to want to somehow have a debate with the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe says it's better that if you feel like you can debate the Alter Rebbe, try to use that energy and that time to learn his mysticism. And especially that people learn from that how much more so. In other words, people say, if they don't pray for long, etc. No, on the contrary, a person should spend time praying and praying intently. And like the Rebbe said, he gives an example. He used to say, like for a joke, that someone would go ahead and what he would do, he would take his tallis, put it on over his head for a half an hour, and he wasn't praying, but he went to sleep, but no one saw. In other words, he put the tallis over his head, and people think he's praying, but the reality is he's sleeping. So why is he doing it? Because he's not ready to pray, he doesn't have the mindset, etc. But he would like at least another person should think that maybe he's thinking something deep in Chassidus. And therefore they're not going to learn from him. They're not going to learn from him that the negative, and they'll learn from him that you have to pray. Now, so the fact is, Rebbe says that once the Rebbe said that at one point they used to write a letter to the Rebbe, and they would write that it should have an effect in me and for those that are hearing. And so the Rebbe has the same idea, as it should affect me and those that are listening to it. Now, the Rebbe says this that it'll affect me or not, that's not important. The main thing, it should affect everyone here, and especially those that are listening, that this is something that the Alter Rebbe wanted, and he demanded from them. And not like the mistake of people think, okay, pray a little bit with intention. Because if that's the case, the Alter wouldn't write that you should pray for an hour and a half. And since he wrote you should pray for an hour and a half, That means you have to pray for an hour and a half and deep thought and deep concentration. And not like some people say, oh, today is not like the olden days in Lubavitch. But no, on the contrary, you have to pray, you have to focus, and it's important to connect to Hashem through prayer, because that will give you that will build the love that you have. And the service is something interesting. That's what we say. We call a businessman Bale Asakim, a person with a lot of business. Because sometimes we find the expression Bale Asek that uses the singular term. And the same thing also when it reference to a Yoshev oil, someone that's sitting and learning, it uses the singular. And the fact is that in the Torah we find the expression is oil in plural. But nevertheless, we find that it's called oil. So why, when it comes to Bali Asakam, something that says plural and something that's singular, and why, when it comes to someone learning, it also we have the expression singular and plural. So he says, when it comes to someone that's a Bali Asek, someone that's in business, so we understand why it says Asakim, plural. Why? Because since where are they? They're out in the street. They're in a public domain. And they come in contact with many other business people. So that's why I use the expression, not singular, asek, but I use the expression of plural, because again, he's out in the street in a public place, and he's dealing with other business people. And so what is the lesson from here? The lesson is that you shouldn't just worry about yourself, that you should pray. But the goal is that you shouldn't, just like you're in the street and you're meeting other people, inspire them to pray as well. So that's why it says Bali Asakim plural. However, when it comes to someone that's learning Torah, Yoshev oil, so what's the lesson by someone that's learning that it says oil and sometimes plural? And the Rebbe explains like this. He explains it based on a teaching of the Tzemach Tzedek in his classical works, Ura Torah, and based on the verse that it says Yoshev Yohalim in Genesis, and over there it says that tense is plural, and it's referring to two types of tense. Why? Because we know there's the tent of shame and there's the tent of Aver, two different types of schools. But what does that mean practically? Because there's the written law and there's the oral law, two types of learning. In other words, it's referring to learning the written law from the written law from Hashem, because we know that the whole Torah is basically the names of Hashem, and the shame comes from the names of Hashem as the whole Torah, and Aver is referring to Torah Sheba'al Peh. So what's the lesson we have? This is a powerful lesson. Just like when it comes to a business person, it's applying to him. It doesn't only apply when he's out there and inspiring other people, but it applies to him as an individual as well. So the same thing also when it comes to someone that's learning Torah, that the idea of prayer applies to both areas. In other words, not only to someone that learns Torah Shabbat and Torah Sheba'al Peh, but even if someone that just sits in the tent of shame, which means, we said before, what does shame mean? That the whole Torah, the written Torah, is the names of Hashem. So even if someone just learns the written Torah, and the same thing also, someone that just learns the oral Torah. You know, so he has one or the other, or he has both. And for example, when you learn Torah, the oral Torah, and you learn it basically just like reading, and you're not going in depth, because the fact is we know the difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah, that basically when you read the written Torah, you have to say what it's saying. You can't change a vowel, you can't change a letter, you can't change a word, because it's the written Torah. There's no room for any changing. Because if you're not pronouncing it the right way, it means you didn't understand what he's saying. It's a different translation. That's when the written Torah. On the other hand, when it comes to the oral Torah, it's just the opposite. In other words, how do we know that you understood it? Is after you learned it, you're able to repeat it in your own words. And that's the whole purpose of learning. In other words, besides the fact that you have to say things in the name of the teacher that you learned it, because the goal is to repeat it in your own words. And maybe you didn't understand what the teacher is saying. And when you share it in your words, so then they get it. Oh, he got it. Now, but what happens is, so by Torah Sheba'al Peh, you have to say the way it says. Torah Sheba'al Peh, you have to use your own words. But therefore, what do we tell this person? Even if he only has the idea of Torah Sheba'al Peh, or he only has Torah Sheba'al Peh, and even Torah Sheba'al Peh, you're saying it in a simple way. It means you don't know what you're saying. So you can think, listen, I'm a Torah Sheba'al Peh person. I say what it is. And when it comes to Hashem, I repeat what it says. I don't have my full, I can't, totally own it. So you're going to think, when it comes to prayer, that's much harder. It has nothing to do with me. So what's the lesson? Even if he's just in the oil of shame, even if he's just a simple person, he still has to go ahead and meditate and spend time praying and cultivating that love for Hashem. But and even though he's going to say, 1 second, he didn't learn enough Chassidus, and he doesn't understand Chassidus, so how is he going to pray? So therefore we say, no. Yoshev oil. Even if you're an oil, you're one type of person, a person, you still have to pray, and you still have to meditate, and you still have to develop that love for Hashem. And that's why it says, Mayim Rabim, which is referring to all the distractions that we have of trying to earn a livelihood and all the confusion and all the static. But nevertheless, that through prayer, through praying, you're actually going to become to much deeper level, and just like someone that's in business, that even though you have all the distraction, but by being able to continue to pray and to clean the love of Hashem, you will able to overcome it. And that's why the verse says that if even a person gives kol hoyin beisa, which means it's referring to the idea of intellect. The person's intellectually powerful, and but nevertheless, he said, listen, I rather study, I rather comprehend things, etc. So we say, no. Prayer is even better than that. And the verse says, that the prayer will give you much more blessings. Then it goes on to say, what happens to Achi Yaseinu, which is another level in a relation with Hashem. So so it comes afterwards again that a person still has to pray. Unfortunately, we don't have the full end of the Chassidic discourse, but again, we have a beautiful Chassidic discourse in the Rebbe, Mayim Rabim, about the importance of prayer, because prayer will feed the love for Hashem, and as long as we have the love for Hashem, all the things that are bothering us and distracting us, the love for Hashem will keep us focused, and we'll be able to stay focused on Hashem and have, like the Rebbe says, all the greatest and most powerful blessings that comes through the struggle. Thanks so much for joining us for our weekly class on Chassidus, and let's hope, like we always finish, our next class will be in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.